you're not alone. Trinity Helix AI. Trinity AI Legal. Trinity AI Support. Trinity AI SME. Trinity AI Data and Analytics. Our mission is 0 to 80.
This is Adam Wright from Trinity Helix. This is the first in a series of 10 reports which looks at the history of the Online Safety Act going way back to 2018, and also looks at it in context of the Casey report which was published this year with some pretty horrendous findings actually. From my own perspective, I was involved personally in the family courts system, so I've got personal experience with the non-molestation orders. Also, I had a false claim made at me at work, so I've got some personal experience of how this system operates in some areas. And in line with that, I was very interested in, through my own IT background, in what happened around the post-Cambridge Analytica crisis. So I had a huge amount of research documentation I already followed, which I was able to resource and go and find the actual history. And I then filled the gaps using a mixture of Gemini Deep research reports, Gemini Deep Think, and Claude Opus with my own architecture on top of it, which can generate what are called gems, which are, I can upload a transcript or a report, and I can extract from it the key elements, but into a gem structure, but I can have the complete data lineage. So it means I can analyse a corpus of information over time. I can keep these gems, and so I can provide but AI is usually a black box, but this is a way to analyse some data and then surface that analysis in this string of these gems. There's something like 600 over the 10 chats, which sort of provide the evidential source data backup. So this is the first of 10. It'll give you a quick overview in terms of what the kind of the remit of the whole investigation, and then it'll sort of get the wheels rolling by just making us remember what the original public outcry was, and the films, the social experiment and the great hack, and really how that was really changed actually, and how that morphed into the Online Service Act that we now have. So I'm just going to play. Each of these reports follows a similar structure. This is a Gemini Deep Research report. These are valuable because they actually go and conduct external verification of their data. I've also used something called a research architect, a Gemini research architect, which is an agent which I've used because there are some shortcomings within the Gemini research report where you have to check things further. So I'll play this audio summary. The reports in full will be available on my Substack, and hopefully we can get a group of citizens together to get to the bottom of this, because the findings are pretty profound. And what we've really got is we've got a complete policy drift that's really, it's a failed ideology, and it's the people that should know it's here, and as a result are basically been, from what I can, been done by non-elected senior figures in the civil service.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive today into the UK's Online Safety Act, the OSA.
That's right.
And we're looking at what our sources are calling the Great Disconnect. Mm-hmm. Essentially, the mission is to explore this pretty startling claim that the public fear that drove the demand for this law was, well, diverted. Hijacked, even.
Hijacked is the word used, yeah. Diverted into a law that ended up tackling something quite different.
Less politically tricky, maybe?
Perhaps. But
and the point there was, if you looked at go back to the Cambridge Analytica, what that uncovers could be large organisations, large corporations, or large governments. And so rather than do something about that apparatus, that's all been left intact. So all of the stuff that could be done by the Cambridge Analytica is still in situ, and rather than tackle that, it appears to be that people in the government looked at it as a ring of power and thought they could use this themselves, and so rather than tackle it head on, which is what the outcry was designed to do, they didn't. They used it to instead to reinforce this failed ideology.
The starting point, you have to remember, was Cambridge Analytica. That
Okay.
scandal.
Right.
The fear back then was huge, and it was top-down, sophisticated data-driven manipulation, potentially subverting democracy itself, a real crisis of...
Fear.
Exactly.
And the thesis from our sources is that the OSA wasn't really a response.
Point to four key women. First, you have the sort of operational threat laid out by Brittany Kaiser and Carol Cadwalader.
Kaiser, right, the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower.
Yes, she showed how commercial data, from insurance firms, things like that, was illegally merged into political campaigns. Lee.eu was one example.
And Cadwalader, the journalist, she framed that as, what was it?
She called it the biggest electoral fraud in Britain for 100 years. The harm wasn't, online bullying, it was political, subverting the democratic process.
Okay, so data weaponization for political ends. What else?
Then there's Dr. Emma Bryant. Her research uncovered this defense to democracy pipeline.
Defense to democracy, what does that mean?
It means military contractors were essentially repurposing counterterrorism tactics, like...
Well, to be clear, none of these things were illegal at all. And actually, if there's any criticism, the criticism is equally levelled at the opposing parties in the two elections. One was Trump 2016 and the other was Brexit. But actually, my data analyses that in both cases, the other side were fighting the last war. The systems used by Cambridge Analytica were first used by the Democrats in the Obama campaign preceding it. And equally, the Remain campaign, led by Cameron and the government, had an opportunity to access Cambridge Analytica too. So it's... What the argument being is there was a suggestion that, things weren't done fairly. And that was the opportunity created initially by what was believed to be the online harm bill. But actually, the government made the decision not to illegalise any of that activity. That's the point.
Not just scraping our data, the behavioral surplus, but evolving that into the actual power to automate and control human behavior on a massive scale.
The other key thing to say here is that these are four very brave women who at the time stood up and highlighted some of the risk factors here. And what's really apparent, if it's not clear, is that there's not a single word that any of these four women who actually testified in front of the select committees. I mean, Carol went on stage, did a TED talk. They really put themselves, their heads above the parapet, and not one of them mentioned a single thing that appeared in the actual legislation that popped out the other end, and it's noticeable because, of course, all these four people are women. So the idea that the Online Service Act is about protecting violence against women and children, it's a bit bizarre because not a single thing highlighted as a risk factor by the four women at the time actually was what ended up in the report.
Structural control.
Okay, so Kaiser, Cadwalader, Bryant, Zuboff, they're all pointing to this massive systemic vertical threat. Institutional power, data, manipulation, democracy itself at stake.
Hold that picture. Now, contrast it with Narrative B, the final law, the Online Safety Act.
And what's the focus there?
Overwhelmingly, it's user-to-user services. It's about tackling interpersonal harm. Bullying, yeah. Harassment, cyber flashing, sending false information if it's intended to cause non-trivial psychological or physical harm.
Wow. Okay, that is quite a shift.
It's an inversion, really. The regulatory focus moved completely from the platform's architecture and its power
to policing the speech and actions of individual users.
Precisely. So the argument goes, this huge systemic political threat got depoliticized, became a social management issue, a problem of, bad online behavior rather than unchecked institutional power.
A crisis of bad manners instead of a crisis of power.
You could put it that way.
And again, this whole violence against women and girls, it's an ideology. It doesn't have any statistical background to it. It's an ideology based upon another ideology, victim belief, and there's been a resistance to go back and check whether any of this is actually working. And of course, it isn't working. It's having the adverse effect. And it's very disappointing that rather that being admitted and changed, it's actually they're using, potentially, the Online Service Act to stop people complaining about it.
And the evidence lines up. Think back to Cadwalader's warning, invisible manipulation. dark ads, like the fake story about 76 million Turks joining the EU to sway Brexit voters.
Right, that was systemic and influencing votes.
But the OSA, it focuses on regulating visible user-generated stuff. Hate speech, bullying posts. It's policing the symptom, you could say, not the underlying cause.
So it frames it as a therapeutic problem, safety, psychological harm, rather than a structural political one.
Exactly. And our sources stress that the OSA's
user-to-user harm in the way the Act defines it.
Correct. It was operating on a different level entirely. So they basically legislated a fix for a problem that wasn't the main public concern that started all this.
Which brings us to the synthesis. This legislative pivot, focusing heavily on protecting women and children, violence against women and girls, VAWG. The sources suggest this focus actually co-opted the identity of the original warners, who were women, to push this different agenda. The original warning was about institutional accountability.
And that leaves us with a final, quite provocative question for you, the listener, to think about.
Which is,
who really benefited from switching the narrative, from sidelining the discussion about controlling platform power and replacing it with this framework for managing individual speech? Essentially a form of social control. Really need to keep looking at.
And the point here is, because we've got this, the state intervention in weakening families, which puts more children at risk of going into care, which is exactly what's happening. What the other thing which is not apparent, which is really shameful, is that once the child is in care, the percentage rate at which they'll be abused goes through the roof. And another thing which is very upsetting about the violence against women and girls narrative, which is a whole DEI thing, like, what's not even touched in any of this data, okay, at all, is what about the boys? Because no one has even considered, like, how is their abuse being tracked? Made children more likely to be abused. We're just left to imagine. What about these young boys? Are they not worth as much as young girls anymore? Is that's what the system is telling us? Because you can bet that the amount of abuse going on in these care homes is absolutely extraordinary. Rochdale had over a 20-year period had 1,400 cases, and when you actually analyse how many children of the age group are in care, it's only several hundred. Okay, and if you analyse how many of those are girls, maybe half. I mean, this is another piece of analysis I've yet to do, but you're looking at a horrific abuse rate, and the other thing is, in my view, quite subversive, because what that does, it takes off the hook. It's not online. The point of failure is the children's home. That's where these people are going to, the grooming gangs or whatever. They're targeting the children's homes, and because that's tied up in the charity industrial complex and people get in contract, no one is saying anything about that, because each child costs £120,000 a year, okay, to maintain. And clearly, unfortunately, parties involved with the vested interests in that don't want to admit that actually there's this horrific. The idea that once a child goes into care, that their lives are going to be enhanced or improved in any way is completely debunked. The reality is, the worst place possible in the United Kingdom for a child to be, not in all cases, I must say, not in all, in many cases, okay, is when they get put into care. That's when they're most at risk of abuse, and yet no one has pointed that out. Like I say, and this should really debunk to have a stated ideologically based policy which is being enacted into law, which completely the country are we building here. Anyway, thank you very much.
You're not alone. Trinity Helix AI. Trinity AI Legal. Trinity AI Support. Trinity AI SME. Trinity AI Data and Analytics.